Welcome to Top Shelf Tech. We are finally back after a bit of a hiatus, apart from a few remote video calls over the COVID lockdown period. And funnily enough, we are in our studio that we'd set up right before COVID for the first time, able to use that in our Parnell offices, Ponsonby offices. It's really back in time. So today we've got Jeff McLuckie from KPMG joining us to talk about cloud being bigger than IT. Jeff, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a director in the technology consulting group at KPMG. So, fairly broad remit. We do strategy and org design and that type of stuff. We do a lot of project delivery support for IT projects, and we also do some kind of digital enablement, software development. For me personally, I'm an infrastructure guy. That was kind of my background, server, storage, networking, compute, that type of thing. Spent many years contracting in sort of the Auckland market.
Yep.
And these days sort of split my time between Auckland and Wellington and sort of the corporate government sectors.
The long bus ride.
The long bus ride with all the rest that commute back and forth.
That's right. Yeah. Are we crossing the personal business divide today? You as a person?
Oh, me as a person. Look, what time's left over once you finish the workday, I guess. I've got two kids, 5 and 10. Family's really important to me.
Yep.
And between family, work, and trying to stay a little bit fit, that's pretty much my life.
Yeah. No, it gets busy, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Yeah, cool. Look, and today we're going to talk about cloud being bigger than IT, and I think most people would understand what that means. And I think there's lots of talk around the impact of cloud on organisations. I'm pretty interested to get straight into the guts of what works and what doesn't work.
Sure.
So I thought we'd start with the negative today, and we can finish on the positive.
Sure.
What have you seen in your role where organisations are implementing cloud where it doesn't consider the bigger picture, that just doesn't work out, and what are some of the pitfalls that can be avoided there?
Yeah, sure. And look, I think it's, we'll spend a bit of time talking through a few of them today. I think there's a big long list, and as consultants we have frameworks, and particularly our cloud framework that covers all these areas. But the big ones for me, they fall into kind of those two groups you mentioned, right? So it's the enabling functions that we don't consider and don't do well that kind of stop us from succeeding. And then the other side is, the more strategic core business areas that really help you leverage the stuff you do get out of cloud. So if we think about the things that don't get considered, I think the most obvious one is probably finance.
Okay.
And, again, we're starting in IT, we love the technology bits, we build cool tech things, but we can't actually use those things and sustain those things if we don't think about how we're funding them. So, the shift from CapEx to OpEx, has been talked to death, but what does that actually mean? From an accounting perspective, as we scale and do more and more cloud, now we end up with this huge expense line that actually impacts your EBITDA from an accounting perspective, right? So have you talked to finance about that? Does finance understand that? Does your senior leadership team understand that actually your profit number might take a hit because your expenditure's in a different way?
So that in the past people were able to buy an asset they could depreciate it and keep your EBITDA a bit higher, and now it's all effectively OpEx and
So we used to take that big capital investment hit, and everyone understands, okay, you need capital to run a project, to build a capability, and then we're going to depreciate. That all makes sense. Now all of a sudden actually our expense line's just going to increase and increase and increase. And that's probably part of a bigger conversation with finance about how we actually build budgets, how we report on spend, how we control spend, and things like that. And I think one of the places we've seen that happen really badly, and I can't name names unfortunately.
Yeah, of course.
Is an organisation spent a lot of time, did some great stuff, working with the vendors, automated CI/CD pipelines, integration with their IT service management tools, building really awesome stuff. But in the end of the day, they actually had to stop and pull the whole thing out because they just couldn't make the financial model work. The entire organisation was capital driven, capital projects, capital funding in big lumps, and they just couldn't move to that OpEx model.
I think one of the interesting things that we'd see with this is if you're a software startup company, it's a cost of sale, it's a cost of goods sold, and if you're delivering value in a business now that's not used to delivering in that kind of model, that we're producing something of value in this, and as we scale that value, we scale the costs with it. Those models are quite different, and it's digital is part of your business now. It's not just a department at the back, that fixes the broken computers and makes sure email gets delivered.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the distance from, as you say, the kind of the product end that actually hits your consumers, if that's kind of your model, to IT will drive that, right? Because, if we think about government and not-for-profit, there is no, the more we deliver, we don't bring more in, right? So this kind of increasing scale, increasing OPEX is just, now we need to build that into our budgets, into our appropriations, and into all of that type of stuff. So, there's no one solution for that. But, if you have these conversations early and have your finance stakeholders, your CFOs, and those teams that are on board with you, it's a hell of a lot easier to start working through that.
Yeah, and look, you used the term appropriation. You talked about public sector.
Yeah.
Is public sector finance well equipped, do you think, to deal with the kind of consumption-based models?
Oh, look, it varies depending on agency and maturity, right? I think there's some absolutely fantastic finance departments out there that are very capable, and there's some that this is quite new to.
Yeah.
And I think we see it even across executives, is understanding what this is going to mean for them, understanding the impact on their numbers, and a bit of education about how it works. I mean, really specific, small example, how do you treat reserved instances from an accounting perspective, right? We're committing up front to 3 years of something. Is that now an asset, or is it an expense, or how do you treat it?
And there's been changes in accounting. I think FRS 16 is the slight tweak there around how you can maybe treat operational expense as, we don't own an asset as a capital. Have you seen many people adopt those kind of practices?
So this is where I'm really lucky to work in a firm where we've actually got audit and tax divisions, that we've actually got a group called Accounting Advisory Services, that this is their whole world, and their whole job is interpreting some of those. So I think we've had a couple of goes where clients have come to us and said, what the hell do we do with this? Can we do something more advantageous with this? And that's where we pull those guys in to go and help and answer that question.
Yes, still very new, isn't it, as well, I think?
Yeah, and I think, reserved instances in particular, you're kind of now getting into the depths of the technical, that, how much does a finance group need to understand about this to actually understand the treatment of it. So that's probably finance. And again, we could go on and on about finance. The other area that I often see done or sort of overlooked is sort of your HR, people and culture area.
Okay.
And I think from what we see, when you are adopting cloud and doing it properly, it normally brings with it, new skill sets, probably new ways of working, potentially your agile, your DevSecOps, some combination of, which has fairly significant impacts for sort of your HR, people and culture. I mean, there's the cultural elements of it. We've seen where we actually want a really great nucleus of talent to kind of drive going forward. So how do we source that? The common sort of situation we've seen is, we're going to train up our people, and our people are going to become these fantastic technical experts. But I've seen sort of without that nucleus of the people that have been there, done that, know how this stuff works, it's very hard to do that. And what you end up seeing is kind of taking those very traditional infrastructure patterns and infrastructure ways of working and doing those in a cloud world, which doesn't really work in a lot of ways.
When you're looking at stuff where you can release regularly and all that kind of stuff, and you're going, well, actually, we're very used to this governance framework and this approach, and it's quite a quite a shift, in particular in how people are used to dealing with risk, and that small incremental releases, and we've got good rollback plans, and we're deploying to blue-green environments. All that kind of stuff is a way of managing risk. Conversely, a way of managing risk is it has to go via cab, and cab only sits every 2 weeks or whatever it might be, right?
And trying to run at that cadence, and I think that's where, if you're talking about the larger organisations, and how does that fit into our enterprise risk framework, and what cadence does that run at, and how do we manage this? And that's a whole separate conversation. Is how do we fit into that risk and governance structure when we're, as you say, wanting to move at this type of pace? So that's another area.
Do you have a tip? Is there something where you go, like, here is a, if you're going to try this, if you're not quite sure how you reconcile the old world and the new world, is there a kind of a starter's model?
I think it's different for every organisation, but the guidance that we always, or I certainly always try and give our clients is, you need to go into this journey thinking about the big picture. If you go into it as IT going, right, we're going to do this cloud thing, it's going to be great, and then we'll just figure out how the rest of the business works, you're going to struggle. So I think it's that early engagement. Who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to get on board to actually start figuring that out? Because at the end of the day, IT can't be experts in everything finance does. We can't be experts in everything risk does. We can't be experts in what all the rest of the business does. So it's really about how do we bring those people together. And ideally, you've got the credibility, the relationships, that stuff, that's really easy. But if you don't, you really need to start building that early to do this stuff well.
You're really starting to talk about a picture that requires that, if it's CEO or a public sector DepSec, top-down buy-in, right, to get the whole organisation starting to think differently and, get the right positive tensions, that it's not everybody sort of going, well, these guys are going a bit fast and I don't really like this, but everybody understands why it's happening, why are we changing.
And when we do a lot of, executive briefings, so boards and chief execs and things like that, just so they get enough of a flavour of what we're doing and why. Because that then helps those conversations, that common language. And certainly on LinkedIn you've seen some senior people getting their Azure Fundamental certifications, and you're going, great, that's awesome. At least then you've got that common language.
So is that something you guys would always recommend? You go into an organisation that hasn't done this before, and you'd say we should be briefing the executive, we should be briefing the board?
Well, I think if it's being adopted seriously, if it's IT doing experiments off in the corner, you're not really going to get to the level of benefits that you're trying to get to. So you do need that senior buy-in. Whether you go straight to the chief exec and go, here's why we're going to go cloud, there's probably some steps in the middle as to how you would do that. But you really do need that top level buy-in to do this at the scale for it to be successful.
Cool. So there's some of the, there are a couple of the big ticket items that where it goes wrong. So the culture, a big one, and I think that's, culture in general around digital and stuff is really, really shifting, right? And then finance, of course, as well, because everybody's got to pay the bills. What about when it goes right? How does that change an organisation in a positive sense, and what are the lead-ins that you should think about to get there?
Yeah, I think for me, what's going right is when the business is in a position that they understand the capabilities they've got and how they can leverage them. And again, I'll talk about the distance between your end user customer of the product or service that the organisation's offering and IT. And the extreme of that is when tech is now an embedded part of a business unit, right? And I've seen there's a few organisations that have gone to that length. So they're enabling. We're side by side. We kind of understand what you're trying to do. We understand the tech part and how we can enable.
Now you're probably going to give me a horses for courses answer,
but how do we do that? Sure. And looking at it, again, I come back to IT needs to be credible, capable, and be able to do this stuff, to be in the room to have the conversation. So we've talked to the chief exec. They kind of understand some of this. There's the broader education about what do these capabilities mean for the organisation. Actually, we can spin up a product in a week. We can spin up a product in 2 weeks and take it to market. All those type of learnings. Having the ability to back that, and all of that comes back to relationships with your stakeholders.
Who owns those relationships? Is that the CIO we're talking about?
Again, different layers, right? Your CIO needs, or CTO, CDO, whatever the equivalent is. They need to have those relationships with their equivalents around the group. They need to be able to articulate, here's the value that we're providing and can provide. And then even down the layers, if we talk about op model design, we talk a lot about business relationship managers. It's a very traditional way of doing this, but having a tech person embedded in a business unit to be both almost the selling, here's all the great stuff that tech can do, but also the bringing back as far as
getting close to the business problems there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, and that's one of the, whether it's been internal IT departments, all that kind of stuff. Once you get to a size of scale with anything, often the technical people end up getting pushed back somewhere and so divorced from the business.
100%.
And I actually, most of the time they hate that and have really valuable contributions as well around, observations around how things are happening and what they could and couldn't do. But it's funny how that natural kind of...
You just end up with the split, right?
It does,
and I think you see it when organisations try and do innovation in isolation. And it'll be someone's great idea that, we're going to hire a chief innovation officer and we're going to build a team around them and they're going to go off and do innovation without really being clear on the value they're offering. And there's actually all these great people in the organisation that understand and want to help and want to do
You've
great
really empowered
stuff.
one group A and told everybody else, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, you just go over there and keep the lights on, please. And that speaks to how you do, that innovation angle. If you go off and do it off to the side and you don't look at how you fund projects, how you deal with failure. A lot of CEOs in our CEO service say, we want innovation, we want change, we want movement. And then the counter question is, how accepting are you if a project fails? And the answer is we're not. So that
which again, government classic, right? It's lots of certainty, and I think my experience is that comes from the politicians right down. Nobody wants to
Yeah.
sign off budget line in the budget, but only to find that then next year that hasn't done anything what it said.
Yeah.
So high degree of certainty
Yeah.
is sort of demanded in some of these areas.
And then, if you're wanting to truly innovate and do different things, you either spend all your time over here trying to figure out how to do those things with certainty, by which time the thing's already gone and
Yes.
it's not innovative anymore, or you find a way to kind of move fast, learn things,
Yep.
and kind of build that structure in.
And I'm a big believer in having a level of capacity in organisations that allows you to do some of that out of band stuff without having to go, try to get a pot of money or get an approval to change something, because otherwise you spend all your time trying to justify it and then deliver a degree of certainty, as opposed to there just needs to be some free time to be able
And look,
to do
I
stuff.
don't think the business case is going away anytime soon, particularly in government, and it's necessary in a lot
Yes.
of cases, but I think there has to be a pathway for, we're going to try something.
Yep.
How are we going to do it?
It's
Let's
just a
not spend
change,
6 months figuring it out.
Change in managing risk and accountability, isn't it, really?
much, yeah.
Because we do want accountability, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We don't want to just be throwing money after good money after bad. Totally.
Yeah, cool. So, biggest success story with cloud. What have you seen where an organisation's absolutely nailed it and they've gone, they've done the right things and they've made basically the transition that they wanted?
Sure. And I think again, sorry, I can't name names again.
Yeah.
But kind of what it's meant, and it's been interesting to talk to a few people, is actually the first benefits they're getting out of is actually, I just don't have to worry about the low level stuff anymore. And that is kind of the enabler then to start doing all this great stuff, being closer to the business, doing all the rest. So actually, I don't have to look after infrastructure to the same extent I did before. My platforms are there, they're scalable, I can use them. And that now means that I've got my smart IT people in business units developing stuff with that business unit, supporting that business unit. And we've seen organisations turn that around and, rather than, it's not a 5-year journey, it's a 9-month journey. And actually now we're fully in the cloud and we're moving really fast. And what we're seeing then, and one of the ones down the road I work with, is actually now there's just all these tools that they've got that they can now go and do cool stuff with. And their biggest challenge is actually, which ones are we going to take to the business, or how do we get the business really excited to do more stuff, rather than how do we keep the lights on, how do we kind of stop the fires.
It's a lot more interesting than trying to figure out when you need to order that next block of disk or server to turn up at the right time to be installed at the right time. And
but equally challenging, right? I think it's a very different skill set, right? We keep coming back to the relationships and the stakeholder management part, right? Is how do I go to a business person and say, hey, there's this really awesome thing that's going to make your life way easier. Spend some time with us to develop a solution, right? That's the conversation you want to be having. But a lot of times the business unit might just go, it's fine, we'll just kind of stick with what we want to do. So that then the role of IT turns very much into that enabler, that shaper, that influencer, rather than the traditional keep the lights on.
Awesome. Any final thoughts for us?
Look, this has been the rapid fire version of this discussion. I'm a very big supporter of, I think cloud is a fantastic set of tools, but I will encourage anyone out there that if this is what you're looking at, you do need to take that organisational view and take it early and really build those relationships and that credibility before you go start putting too much up there.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
No worries, it's been fun.
Good chat. Good
Great.
chat.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.